Thanks for tuning in to the ATRL Charts podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to Chart Data. You're probably already aware of the excellent Chart Data Twitter account. Its ceaseless, timely updates have been cited by countless artists, managers, and media outlets. Now, the operator of the account is launching a full-fledged website, featuring contributions from myself. The website contains more in-depth updates and statistics than the Twitter account does, and it also hosts all-time leaderboards and other fun chart miscellany. Check out the website at chartdata.org and never miss another milestone. That's chartdata.org. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of the ATRL Charts podcast. As always, my name is Alexander. I'm here with my co-host Aaron. We have a lot to talk about today.
Welcome back. It's Aaron from UMitch, or Aaron ATRL. UMitch on ATRL, sorry. We've been gone for a couple weeks, but Alex was on vacation, so let's dive into some interesting topics for today.
Well, the big news this week, shocking news, the biggest chart surprise of the year in my opinion. Travis Scott's Astroworld, his third studio album, is on course to debut with almost 500,000 units. The latest projections from HDD have it in the range of 455 to 470,000, and even that is a huge increase from what it was originally projected. 300,000 to 400,000 were the initial projections, and even that was a massive improvement over Birds in the Trap Sing McKnight, which was his first number one album on the Billboard 200. His last album released the summer of 2016. It debuted with only 88,000 units. So already a massive jump for Travis Scott, but now he's on course for what could be the second biggest debut of the year. He needs to beat 461,000, which was what Beer Bongs and Bentleys did to get there. And this has really been such a massive reaction. I don't really know. I mean, there are explanations for it, but I wanted to get your take on why Travis has suddenly become so huge and why this album release has been such an event.
Yeah, I'm very shocked as well because, he's not really a person we hear on the radio a lot, compared to other artists or other of his contemporary acts, if you will. So, he doesn't really have a lot of exposure in that sense. So when I saw the thread where, on ATRL it said, HDD Travis Scott almost 500K, I said, what? That really? Where did that come from? Like, I'm always excited to see, huge numbers whenever any artist or any act does it. But I really just tried to figure out, like, why was it, like, what was the drive behind this project? So I think, for my opinion, what I believe is going on is that I think that with Travis Scott, he has developed such a core fan base, if you will, just his social media presence and just his exposure with his previous music in the past. Now, I know before, a few years ago, he did have a hit, not that big of a hit, but, pretty, sizable hit per se with Antidote, which came out, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And I know that was something that I heard on the radio a lot. Now, I don't know if that has anything to do with fueling the success of this album, but I do think it does have a lot to do with the fact that when you build that fan base over so long, your fans are waiting for you to, put out an album. So when he surprise release on Friday, everyone was excited to go buy it, stream it, consume it, as they are doing, and as we were seeing with the current the hits daily double numbers, people are coming out en masse to consume this album, and it's amazing to see such a huge response to this. And again, it's even more impressive considering the fact that, one, it was a surprise release. Two, he's not, again, as we mentioned before, he's not really that big on radio compared to his other contemporaries. And three, a lot of, he's done a lot of, featurings with other artists, which also may have, raised his exposure level a little bit. So, I think those are some of the factors that he has going for what's transpiring right now with this current album.
So, two important points there, I think. The first being that he really drummed up anticipation for Astroworld. You're absolutely right about that. I think he teased Astroworld before he even released Birds in the Trap Sing McKnight. So that was over, I mean, 2 years ago. People have been anticipating this album from Travis Scott, and also that he is not radio friendly. That makes the debut even more impressive. Having listened to the album many times over, there aren't many radio friendly songs on the album. It's got very varied, eclectic production, not your typical trap album in any sense of the word, and only a couple out of 15 tracks, or a large number of tracks, only a couple of them are radio friendly, in my opinion. That makes it even more impressive. Now, one of the biggest reasons that he is having this kind of success is strong direct to consumer sales. So his official site has Astroworld merchandise, and a lot of that merchandise that you can buy is bundled with the album. So you buy the piece of merchandise and you get the album along with it. So for example, there's an Astroworld logo sweatpants which comes with the digital album for $110. You can buy an Astroworld blanket which comes with the album for $75. The items are only available for this tracking week, so they're only up for another 18 hours or so, I think, according to the website. That gives fans further incentive to buy them. And of course, the album bundle makes a huge difference. The pure sales projections from HDD have, I think, almost tripled since those have really taken off. So really strong sales through the artist's website. That's not very common. The last time we really had website sales being that important, if I recall correctly, was Kanye West's "The Life of Pablo" over 2 years ago in 2016. That was the only way that you could buy his album traditionally, was through his website. It was otherwise a streaming exclusive. So really unique method of promotion, but it's worked out tremendously for Travis Scott.
Yeah, and that's very important to note because we've talked about how uh, bundling tour tickets with album sales has become a big thing. So maybe this is going to be another trend that we see where artists are going to do direct sales from their website or from their official social media pages, and seeing the response that Travis Scott has gotten from this album, it kind of begs the question if labels are going to look at this and say, maybe this is something that we should kind of jump the trend on. Because, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, labels are interested in money and sales. That's all they care about. They don't care about what's on the album. They're just caring about, is this going to sell, and if it is, what's the best way we can do this. So that's a good point that you made with Travis Scott having that exposure directly from his official website to drive those album sales. And that's pretty impressive because, again, in this day, you don't really see that having that much an effect on many album sales. But for this case, again, with things, his fans expecting this album for quite some time, I think that is what's helping that in that aspect as well.
And indeed, most of the merchandise is now sold out. There are only a few items still available, and coincidentally, they are the ones with album bundles available. The album has been absolutely massive on Apple Music, as is par for the course for most rap albums these days. At one point, it held down the entire top 15, and it also had the third biggest first day on US Spotify for an album. In terms of streams, it had 40.2 million streams. That's just behind Beer Bongs and Bentleys, which had 47.1 million streams, and Scorpion in a league of its own with 80.5 million first day streams on US Spotify. It's gotten rave reviews so far, an 85 average on Metacritic. That's been helping, already fabulous word of mouth for the album. Everybody has been talking about it. I really believe that this is the biggest album release event of the year, even surpassing Scorpion, you could argue, in terms of the word of mouth. It's just been amazing. And on top of that, the early predictions from Simon Falk, one of the best Hot 100 predictor out there. He's got everybody following him because his predictions are so accurate. Sicko Mode is on track to debut at number 5, Stargazing at number 7, and two other songs inside the top 20, Carousel and Yosemite. So 4 songs by Travis Scott to debut in the top 20 of the Hot 100 next week based on those early predictions. Now, one of the things that you have to wonder about, though, is how front-loaded is he going to be? And that's a question that we're going to revisit a little bit later in the show when we talk about the great battle that's brewing for August 17th, the week of August 17th, between Ariana and Nicki and possibly Travis. Birds in the Trap had fantastic longevity. It's up to 1.432 million units since its release. That number is sourced from UK Mix, which posts some very reliable unit figures for albums. And that was just from a couple weeks ago. July 29th was when that number was posted. So it's almost at 1.5 million units Birds in the Trap is. Astroworld, you figure, can it go 2 times platinum? Could it even go 3 times platinum in the long run?
I think 2 times platinum is a feasible possibility, if that's a statement I can use. Um, it's just based on the fact that he has a lot of interest right now, and it just is a question of, well, if he gets radio support with any singles, any future singles he's going to release from this album, then obviously I think that'll drive the album sales or consumption even more with this project. So I think 2 times platinum is a possibility. 3 may be a stretch, but I'm not saying it's not possible. Um, but I do think 2 times. I think double platinum is going to be something that's achievable based on what we know right now. Again, we don't know if Travis Scott is going to promote, or if he's going to actually send his singles or send any songs to radio. So that's just another factor that you have to really consider if you're going to think about an album's longevity. And we kind of talked about in the previous podcast where when you get deeper into singles from a project, streaming kind of fatigues and it kind of goes down, and you're not having a lot of people streaming a year from now versus what you have in the first 3 months of an album being released. So that's kind of something to think about as well. But yeah, I think double platinum is probably a great possibility.
Right, and I want to talk a little bit about what happened last time for Travis Scott, which was an unusual occurrence. Pick Up the Phone was the big single from the Birds in the Trap era, and it didn't take off immediately. It was released before the album came out, but it reached its peak months after the album debuted, and it had solid longevity. And then you had Goosebumps. Goosebumps was a second single. It was the second single, but it was released many months after the album came out, and it really was steady throughout the entirety of last year. Put up some great on-demand streaming numbers. It was in the Spotify top 50 for forever. I can't remember the exact length of time that it was inside that region, but it really had great on-demand streaming for a long time. And those 2 songs fueled the longevity of Birds and enabled it to get past 1.3, 1.4 million as it has. And like you said, there are not many radio-friendly songs on this new project. So it'll be interesting to see if this ends up like a KOD situation where even though you have some songs that debut really high, as the KOD, the song, and ATM and Kevin's Heart all debuted in the top 10, they crashed quickly because they're not too radio friendly. They didn't get pushed to radio, and J. Cole, of course, is notoriously front loaded, so he's kind of not a perfect example here. But you have to wonder if Travis is going to be able to have hit singles this time around, and that's a big question. I don't. So far, there's only one indication with regards to singles. He's put out a video for the song "Stop Trying to Be God." That song features Stevie Wonder on harmonica. It features vocals from James Blake. Features a few others that I know I'm missing. Just a video for that song has been put out, but nothing in terms of radio ad dates, nothing in terms of official, label confirmations that anything's going to be a single. So we're going to have to wait on that. But do you think that he will have any hit singles from this album? I mean, have you listened to the album? What do you think about if you have? Do you think that any of the songs stand out to you as radio friendly?
Well, to be honest, I haven't listened to anything from the album yet, but I am just thinking in terms of what's what the popular tracks are right now. With the 2 songs that are predicted to hit or to debut in the top 10 this week or next week, actually. I think there's a possibility that at least one of those songs will be a sustained hit. We talked about in the podcast maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago where you have these hits that debut high and they crash because of the streaming, the massive streaming numbers that they have for the first week. And I think, a lot of his songs are probably going to suffer that fate, that same fate. But I think there will be at least one song that does debut in the top 10 that will have some type of staying power, if you will, on the charts. Based on the fact, even if it gets any significant radio airplay or not, I think there'll be one legitimate track that does have that type of hit power, that staying power on the charts, and not something that just starts high and just falls like a rock, if you will. But obviously, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in with any type of promotion that happens.
Well, just to go through a couple of the candidates, I guess I should say, Sicko Mode is the song that's taking off, the song that's going to debut the highest on the Hot 100, and that's probably because it features Drake. But it's an unwieldy song in terms of structure. It's over 5 minutes long and it has two beat switches, so very radio unfriendly, unlikely to be played, on any format. You've got Yosemite, which is a song that's kind of taken off a little bit on streaming. It's the third highest track on Apple Music behind Sicko Mode and the opening track, which is called Stargazing. Um, that is not too radio friendly in my opinion, but the GP has kind of, I guess, taken to it, so that's always a possibility. The song "Who What" features Migos. Well, actually, only Quavo and Takeoff, but it does feature them, and that sounds like kind of a classic trap anthem to me, and sounds like it could get airplay on Rhythmic and Urban if they did push it, but I'm not sure if they will. Um, Other than that, and of course you have Skeletons and Wake Up are the two tracks featuring The Weeknd, but neither of those to me is radio friendly at all. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Of course, all eyes will be on Ariana and Nicki next week, um, as they jockey for the number one spot on the Billboard 200. Let's talk about that a little bit more. On August 17th, we're going to have at least two massive releases, massively high profile releases coming. Ariana Grande's Sweetener and Nicki Minaj's Queen. Now, both of these artists have been discussed ad nauseum on ATRL as they prepare for their album campaigns. Ariana's released two singles so far: "No Tears Left to Cry," which is a fairly big hit, and "God Is a Woman," which has performed, decently on on-demand streaming since it came out, essentially a promo single. Nicki has been quieter. A lot of people would argue that she's been overshadowed by Cardi B this year. Of course, the question is, has Cardi permanently replaced her? We'll see, I guess, when the album comes out. And then you've got Lil Pump. Lil Pump actually was scheduled to release on the 17th, but in a tweet from HDD less than a day ago, 22 hours ago actually, they reported that despite all indications to the contrary, and I'm quoting the tweet, Lil Pump's release date is now TBA. Stay tuned. So Lil Pump maybe not releasing on the 17th. And then you've got Lil Uzi Vert. Lil Uzi Vert announced that he would have an album coming out called Eternal A Take. And this album would be coming out, I believe, sometime next month. He announced the album on Instagram, but he hasn't put out a defined date for it. He definitely could release on the 17th, so we should at least consider the possibility of that happening. But so far, he hasn't indicated anything coming. So, with regards to this big battle, who do you think comes out on top, and why?
Mm, that's a really good question. Really great to discuss this because each of these artists have different factors for going for all of their albums. I mean, with Queen, we know that there's going to be tour bundling, which if you guys don't know, that means that every time that a fan or a consumer buys a concert ticket, they have the option of redeeming an album, which will be Queen in Nicki's case, along with the ticket, along with the concert ticket. So that counts as an album sale for that week, for the very first week of the for the album. So we know that's a factor, and we know how much concert tickets have helped to bolster albums up the Billboard 200. Ariana Grande, I'm not sure if she has a ticket bundle, but I do know, based on previous trends, her album sales have been very consistent number wise. So I do think there won't be too much of a decline for her from Dangerous Woman, which will help her, I guess, be in line with wherever Nikki is going to fall. I can say with some confidence, I do think that Ariana and Nikki will be in the top two, with some variation. Again, we don't know if Lil Uzi Vert is going to release and how he's going to release his album. If it's going to be streaming only, if it's going to go, full gauntlet and go to every platform possible. And then Lil Pump, not sure if he's going to do a streaming only set as well, or if he's going to go full gauntlet and release to every platform as well. So you have those factors going as well. And there were rumors about Nicki Minaj's album, being digital only and streaming only, and the physicals will be available later. But I'm not sure if that's true, if that's been confirmed or what. But I don't. If Nicki wants the number one, I think she's gonna just go full force and release everything at one time, the physicals, digital, streaming, all of that at the same time. So I don't think there's gonna be a delay with the physicals. But back on track, I do think Ariana and Nicki will end up in the top two somewhere. I don't honestly don't believe, and I hope this doesn't come back to bite me, but I do not see Nicki Minaj completely, bombing like a lot of people are anticipating. I mean, I don't. She's obviously not going to do pink print numbers back in 2014, which I believe she did about 190 pure sales, and then that translated to about 240,000 in total units back in 2014. So that was almost 4 years ago. I don't think she's going to do those numbers, and it's not Christmas time, so those numbers are going to be probably a bit lower than 2014. So I think that's going to put her somewhere in the 100, 150, or 125, 175 range, if you will. And I think Ariana's going to fall somewhere in that range too. Now, I may be overestimating these artists a little bit based on previous numbers, but I know with the fact that Nicki having a tour bundle, she's going to fall somewhere pretty high. Not saying she's going to necessarily snag the number one album, but I do think she has an advantage, at least over the artists such as Lil Pump and Lil Uzi Vert, because they're not big on the album side. They're just going to have a lot of streaming numbers. But then again, we don't even know how much of the hype that they're going to have to generate those type of streaming numbers. Like, for example, Lil Uzi Vert, we know, has one of the biggest streaming hits of all time, which is EXO. I think I'm pronouncing this right. EXO Tour Life, which stayed in the top 50 for a very, very, very long time on the U.S. Spotify charts. So he has a lot of exposure and a lot of experience with on-demand streaming. And also Gucci Gang was a big hit as well. So, but I don't think those artists are going to really necessarily compete with Ariana and Nicki in that sense. I do see Ariana and Nicki being somewhere in the top two, but as far as number one, it's honestly really all a toss up, because we don't know if Ariana Grande is going to maybe discount an album maybe midweek, because we've seen that happen as well, where an artist is neck and neck for the Billboard 200, and then the label will decide to discount an album through the website or through the official website store. So you have that angle as well, and I've seen that happen. Actually, Ariana's first album, she was going against Tamar Braxton, and they were neck and neck for the number one. And I'm not sure which one of them did what, but I believe Tamar tried to discount her album through her official website, and she actually fell short by a couple thousand, about 2,000-3,000 album sales, and missed out on the number one. And Ariana's Yours Truly, which was her first album, actually ended up debuting at number one. So you have those things you have to think about as well. But I guess to summarize all of that, I do think Ariana and Nicki will be in the top two, almost for sure. As far as number one, again, that's kind of a honestly a hard thing to say, but if Nicki's album sales are or if her concert sales are going pretty good, I think she has a chance because one album sale is equivalent to one unit on the Billboard 200. So obviously album sales are going to weigh more. Um, but yeah, those are kind of my thoughts right now.
So I guess I want to go through these artists one at a time, starting with Ariana. I think a lot of people criticize the decision for her to release in August because they thought it was too much of a gap between No Tears Left to Cry and Sweetener. And I kind of sympathize with that argument right now because she's not going to have the benefit of streams from a single as much as she did with Dangerous Woman. And I know that Dangerous Woman came in 2016 before streaming it mattered as much as it does now. But No Tears Left to Cry is only doing 3 million a week on Spotify. And at its peak it was doing much more than that. It was doing double, triple that. So you're not going to see a lot of pretty much all of the streaming numbers for Ariana's album are going to come from the fan base. Just like how pure sales come from the fan base, all for first week streams are mostly going to come from the fan base. And Dangerous Woman did 175,000 units first week. 129,000 of those were pure sales. Obviously that sales figure is going to be nowhere near that because we're in 2018 and not 2016. So even if she does like 70 or 60,000 sales, I think that would be impressive. So let's say she does 65,000 in pure sales. Take the midpoint. Streaming is going to be higher than it was in 2016. She only did 30,000 streaming equivalent units in 2016 with Dangerous Woman. Let's say that doubles at least, because if you think about it, streaming has roughly, I think, tripled, quadrupled since then. I mean, on-demand streaming has been up like 50% every year. So I think if I guess like if she does like 60,000, 70,000 units from streaming, and then you add in the track equivalents, she's probably on track to do near what she did with Dangerous Woman. Of course, big first weeks are getting a little bit rarer, so a slight decline would not be something alarming. I would say that I think she's going to do around 160,000 units first week, which is very very good for her first week in 2018. Of course, the question now is that enough? Nicki Minaj, again, it feels so weird to be saying that Nicki Minaj is in the running for a number one album, even though she's such a stalwart, because she's been very, very quiet this year. And not just with regards to her music, with regards to her profile in general. Lately, she's been trying to ratchet up her profile with Fifi, which has been, obviously a smash hit. We talked about it on last week's podcast, or 2 weeks ago, maybe I should say. And she's got a new Apple Music radio show as well, just announced today. Queen Radio will debut tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So she's really trying to raise her profile in advance of the album release, which is a good idea. And of course, as you mentioned, the debut of the Pink Print is too long ago to be indicative of anything. And tour bundles are sort of a wild card because you can have tour bundles and have them not really matter, or you can have tour bundles and they'll absolutely make your first week. I mean, Post Malone had tour bundles, but no one was talking about that because he overshadowed himself with such a massive first week on streaming. Although you notice that he did have a higher proportion of pure sales than most rap albums do first week, and we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about scenarios for Travis Scott's third week and whether that can block Ariana and Nicki. But tour bundles, they can be important or they can be less important. They'll make a difference. It's just a matter of how much of a difference they'll make. So Nicki Minaj is a wild card, and it's difficult to tell precisely how big her fan base is at this moment. You wonder how much of her base has left her since 2014. You wonder how much Cardi has siphoned away. You wonder, has she gained any new fans? I mean, I honestly don't know the answers to those questions. And the answers to those questions are what's gonna tell us how high her debut is gonna be. I personally cannot imagine her doing over 225 to 250,000 units, even if the bundle's a smashing success. But I do think she has a chance at beating Ariana, and that sounds so weird to say, but I do think she has a chance, if only because of the potential of the bundles. And so I think that I would say right now, I wouldn't want to bet on this at all, but I would say that Nicki Minaj probably has like a 30-40% chance of going number one, and Ariana more like a 50% chance, because you have to account for the fact that Travis Scott could block them both. Now, Lil Uzi Vert is an interesting case. If he does drop, and of course this is all speculation because we do not know when Lil Uzi Vert is releasing. His first album, Love Is Rage 2, last summer debuted with 135,000 units, 150.6 million on-demand streams, and it's now at around 1.3 million units since its release. So a smashing success for Lil Uzi Vert. One has reason to think that his streaming numbers will get larger because, of course, the streaming market has improved since last year, and he's generally kept a high profile. He's had a bunch of high profile features. Um, so I think if he were to release, he would be able to beat that number and do 150,000 or so. And if Ariana underperforms and Nicki's tour bundle isn't what it's all made out to be, then he has a very slight chance at the number one if he does release. But that's kind of a long shot. And so I think the more interesting thing to talk about is Travis Scott's third week. Travis Scott's third week, again, all speculation, but very interesting. So the new releases are going to go up against an album that has obviously been way bigger than we ever expected it to be. So here's the deal. Travis Scott should see a larger than normal second week drop. Why? Because a substantial portion of his first week units are pure sales. And remember, that's because of the website, because of the merch bundles. He's having a lot more pure sales than a rapper normally would in their first week. And to kind of illustrate that, I kind of jotted down the percentage of first week units coming from sales for each rap album this year. XXXTentacion, question mark album. Only 15.3% of his first week units came from pure sales. Migos, Culture 2, only 19.1%. Scorpion, only 21.9%. Even Post Malone with the tour bundles, only 33.2%. And if you take the midpoints from the HDD projections for Travis Scott, he's on pace for 39% of his first week units coming from sales. So that's a lot. And that's an indicator that he's probably going to have a larger second week drop than normal. And if you look at the second week drops for those four albums, 42%, 56%, 54%, and 58%, you naturally have to conclude that he's probably going to have a larger drop, something maybe in the 60-65% range. And I did the calculations. If he drops 60%, that means he's going to do 188,000 second week. If he drops 65%, he's going to do 165,000 second week. And if he drops 70%, which I don't think he will, but it's a possibility, that would be 141,000. So that's just second week. Now, the week that Ariana and Nicki are releasing, that's going to be his third week. So he has to really have a good third week to have a chance at beating Ariana and Nicki, and that's assuming that Nicki's tour bundles don't push her above 200K, in which case she'll get the number one probably. But, I mean, do you think that Travis has a chance here?
Yeah, I kind of omitted him when I was talking about the top four and just before you were talking. Um, he's definitely a wild card and should be considered because, again, rap albums, they tend to have longevity on the Billboard 200 because of streaming and seeing these streaming numbers now. I don't, obviously, they're not, as you just proved with the math, these streaming numbers are not just going to drop like rocks in the next 2 weeks, or in the next week or so, where Nicki and Ariana are going to release. So, they do have some competition that they have to contend with. Now, it's the reason why, one of the reasons why I think, the competition is so stiff, if you will, is because it's summertime and, a lot of people are not really concerned about, buying music or whatever, or music consumption at this time of year. It's back to school. A lot of parents and a lot of people are focused on, doing that. So, if this was any other time of the year, if it was maybe, closer to Christmas or what have you, maybe the races will be a little bit different. But with it being the summertime, things are more stagnant and, numbers really don't move as much, which is why we are having this discussion, and which is why, we're sitting here trying to figure out who is going to come out on top. And, Travis Scott could very well be in the top three within the next couple of weeks when Nicki and Ariana are scheduled to go against each other. So, not only do we have to worry about Nicki and Ari competing against each other, but now, Nicki and Ariana fans have to contend with the possibility of Travis Scott. And, I'm not even sure about this, but I think depending on the numbers, Drake could also be somewhere in the top five as well. I mean, Scorpion is, still doing pretty good. Um, so that could be a possibility as well. Not saying he's going to block anyone, but, I do think he's going to be somewhere in the top five as well with the numbers that he's, still pulling with, In My Feelings and Nice for What are still getting really good numbers. So that's something to think about as well. I'm not saying Drake is going to block anybody or magically shoot back to number one, but I don't think Drake should be off the back, or I don't think Drake should be out of the question either in that aspect.
Yeah, Drake is projected to do around 130,000 units this week, which of course as you said, that's nothing to sneeze at, especially for an album in its sixth week. Now, it's going to be very tough for Scorpion to even be number two or number three, unless everybody happens to underperform at the same time, which would be kind of hilarious. Um, but the thing with Drake is that he just released a little bit too early for this battle. If he had released 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, he would be in prime position to block everybody this week, which would of course send everybody into a frenzy and make for a lot of meltdowns. But in this case, Drake's likely to finish behind both Ariana and Nicki, as well as probably Travis Scott as well. So going back to the numbers a little bit for Travis, if he has a 65% drop and goes to 165,000 second week, and let's say he has a good third week and he only drops like 10-15%, that takes him to around 135, 140,000 units. Ariana would need to underperform pretty big to be below that. And so would Nicki, especially considering she's got bundles. I just don't envision Travis blocking both of them. The way that Travis blocks both of them, ironically, is if he underperforms this week. So let me explain. The reason that Travis's predictions have been increasing so much this week is because the sales projections have gone up and up and up and up because of all the success of the merchandise, this wild runaway success. The pure sales projections were initially in like I believe the 50K, 60K range, and they're at like 150 to 170K now. So they've surged. So that's why Travis's predictions have increased so much. It's really not that his streaming projections have gone up that much. It's the sales projections have gone up a ton. And as we said, the more of his units that are coming from sales, the bigger drop he's going to have. So I would argue that the more units he does, if he overperforms his projections, even as they've already been raised, and he does something like 520K, I say there's no way he blocks them because he's going to have such a big drop second week that it's going to take him out of the question. But if he underperforms this week, and if that underperformance is due to sales underperforming at the last minute or something, then it becomes a lot more interesting because then your drop is going to be smaller second week and you have a more competitive third week. So ironically, people who want Ariana and Nicki to be blocked should be rooting for Travis to underperform. And people who want Ariana and Nicki to be number one and number two should root for a gargantuan first week from Travis. So, an interesting situation here. And you have to wonder, there have been, I mean, last year's race between Imagine Dragons and DJ Khaled, of course, which was much maligned because of the free streams, the free title streams that DJ Khaled got credit for. That was a race in which direct-to-consumer sales, they really tried to make that a big deal for Imagine Dragons. It didn't work in the end, but Imagine Dragons were trying to use website sales to get over the hump and get that number one, and they would have gotten it if Tidal hadn't played dirty, had followed the rules. So website sales have been big. There's precedent for website sales playing big roles in these races. So I just wonder if during the big week, the week of August 17th, if they have some yet to be announced additional deals coming on the website, because that would make it a lot more interesting. Even though there's a banner on the top of his site right now that reads that Astroworld merchandise is only on sale for another like 17 hours before it all goes away. You have to wonder. There's the possibility because the website sales were so successful this first week. You have to wonder if they bring back a little something for the third week just to make the race a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, that would be very, you know, be in the eyes of fans, that would be kind of petty for him or his label to do that. I know the fans will be pissed off, and like you said, they'll be like, "Oh my God, why is he doing this?" Blah blah blah. But it's every label and every artist wants to sell, and they want their music to be out there. So if that's what they decide to do, then that's what they're gonna do, and there's nothing that the other labels can do about it but to compete with them or to think of a better strategy. So, like we said, I mentioned earlier, if the races are that close, I would not be surprised to see if someone from Ariana's team, someone from Nikki's team, or whoever decides to, maybe discount an album for a couple days on maybe Amazon or even through their website. And it's having a number one album gives you bragging rights, and everyone wants to have a number one album. So I wouldn't be surprised to see any of that happen as well.
And Drake actually did it himself with Views. I think it was the eighth week at number one, I believe. He had to discount it just to get past Red Hot Chili Peppers. He beat them by a few thousand, like at the last second, because he discounted it to I believe $6.99 on iTunes or whatever it was. So, I mean, who knows? Drake could do a massive discount for Scorpion too. That would be very funny. But I don't think that'll happen. But you can't rule it out. So you can't rule out these kind of last minute desperation tactics to get the number one. Um, so it'll be a very interesting race, but I want to move now to kind of the consequences for each artist. If Ariana pulls off the number one, or if she doesn't, if Nicki pulls off the number one, or if she doesn't, what are the consequences? I mean, this might be the crown jewel for both of these artists in terms of their eras, because I'm not sure how much success that they can rely on getting in terms of, post album release singles, considering Ariana has already kind of gone through the cycle with one song and already released a promo single. You have to wonder how far she can go with future singles. And Nicki Minaj, who just has not had a lead hit in a long time, and you don't know if she's going to be able to have one this era. The number one's really important for her because, like I said, it could be the biggest achievement of the era. So, do you think that either Ariana or Nicki is going to have much success with singles after the album release? And if so, I mean, what's the best way for them? What's the best path for them to get success after the album release?
I think in terms of chances, I think Ariana's chances are going to be slightly greater than Nicki's chances of getting sustained hits after the album release. Um, just based on previous history, I mean, with Dangerous Woman, Ariana had two big hits, or one big hit and then one sizable hit after the album release, which was Into You and Side to Side, which ironically featured Nicki Minaj. And then Every Day, which was the last and final single from the Dangerous Woman era, it flopped. Everyone knows it. Every Day featuring Future only peaked, I believe, at either number 53, number 55 on the Hot 100. Radio didn't really support it. But there was a final single, really no promotion, so that was kind of expected. Nicki's errors after her albums have been released, they're very, very, very sporadic and kind of up in the air, because you'll have Nicki, she'll release maybe two or three singles to see what kind of sticks out there, what radio's going to pick up, what they're not going to pick up, and she kind of goes with that. I mean, with the last album, that was with Only, featuring Drake, Chris Brown, and featuring Drake, Chris Brown, and Lil Wayne. And then after that, she had Truffle Butter, which featured also Drake, Lil Wayne, and then Tigga, which were both pretty sizable hits. And then after that, it kind of fizzled out. The Night Is Still Young kind of underperformed based on the standards that the other singles had. And I think now fast forward in 2018, the music scene is much different these days in terms of hit singles for Ariana. I think she's better off probably in having a sustained hit after the album comes out. And haven't really followed God Is a Woman like that, like pretty closely, but I do see that it's not performing up to the standards of the lead single, which was No Tears Left to Cry, which we just mentioned was a pretty big hit for her this year. And God Is a Woman is, again, one of those singles that are doing pretty good on radio, but streams and sales are kind of lagging behind. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts. you know, there's a possibility that the single could pick up very late, and then radio supports it, but then streams and sales are just way too far behind for it to even be or given or to even have a chance of getting a higher peak on the Hot 100. And for those of you who don't know, God is a Woman peaked at the very disastrous in chart terms, very disastrous number 11, which, number 11 is just one spot away from being from the top 10. So, that's something that you have to consider if they're even going to continue to push this single after the album comes out, or if they're going to go ahead and just go with something different and pretend that God is a Woman didn't happen. But I do think Ariana's in a better position because pop radio is always going to be on her side. Rhythmic, hit or miss. They're going to be on her side sometimes. Nicki always has rhythmic and urban to her advantage, so she's going to have that on her side. But then we don't really know how her streams are going to perform because, as you just said about 5 or 10 minutes ago, you know, she's been pretty silent, and the only thing big from this era has been Chun Li. But as we know, and this is no shade or no type of no type of bad wording, but Chun Li was pretty front loaded. It debuted it or jumped to number 10 in its second week after its first partial week of sales and streams. But then after the number 10 peak, it tumbled and kind of, stayed on the Hot 100 for a few weeks, bouncing up and down here and there. But again, that wasn't the hit that she was looking for. We didn't have an Anaconda this era. We didn't have a Starships, a Super Bass, and she hasn't had those type of hits, since since her previous albums. So, I think she's kind of in the danger zone, if you will, when it comes to having the power to have a massive hit, as we just mentioned, the previous hits that were just mentioned, and to have those hits, you're gonna have to have the streams. So, and as we see right now, Bed featuring Ariana Grande has not done well at all. Its peak was its debut, which was number 43. The video was released that kind of brought it back up to the top 50, but now it has fallen back into the 60s on the Hot 100. And I think it's kind of safe to say that that single has fizzled out. So it's kind of back to the, I guess, proverbial drawing board for Nicki and her team.
And you make a lot of good points there, and I'm going to return to the one about radio in just a minute. But I want to talk about Ariana Grande's path to getting post album release hits. And I think that path lies in video streams because she was very strong in video streams last era, stronger in video than she was on demand. And of course, on demand has now skewed more towards hip hop and rap than it was in 2016. So even despite the new rules on Billboard, of course, downweighting the influence of free streams, and of course, all YouTube streams are free streams essentially. I mean, no, I guess you could talk about people who pay for YouTube Red, but even though I'm not even sure how that works, honestly. Basically, all YouTube streams are free streams for chart purposes, and and yet I do think that that's where she can really take advantage of past success. And she's put out some very creative music videos in the past. She's put out a couple of very attention-grabbing music videos this era, especially the one for "God Is a Woman," which almost got it into the top 10, as you mentioned. So I think if she can come up with some really creative videos, really creative visuals, and time them right so that the video release coincides with the peak on radio, you've got a recipe for a potential big hit. And looking at the track list, she's decided to opt for no features. So any kind of on-demand streaming is going to be restricted to her fan base and people who hear it on the radio and stream it, which is not going to be much because, as we've discussed in the past on this podcast, the radio and streaming audiences are quite separate nowadays. So the lack of features is, I guess, another indicator I think that they're going to play for video streams this era. And I'm not sure if she's going to try and do a high profile remix for one of the songs. That, of course, has become, again, a more popular method lately for boosting a song. I think she's capable of pulling off like a Latin remix. I don't know if the material on the album is sonically appropriate for that kind of thing, but I wouldn't rule out a high profile remix. For Nicki Minaj, what you said about radio is absolutely right. Her path lies through getting a big hit on rhythmic and urban radio. She, of course, has been a presence there the entire decade basically. So she has the most. I mean, that's really where she's going to find the biggest bastion of support, because like you said, she's a wild card on streaming. We don't know how how the general public is going to respond to whatever single she puts out, whatever's on the album. Maybe a song takes off, like has been the case for many rap albums this year. Maybe an album track takes off and does great. That's probably the best case scenario for her. But maybe that doesn't happen, and maybe the general public doesn't take a liking to any particular song, and maybe the album is front loaded. The way that she saves the era is through rhythmic and urban radio, and I think that if she's smart and her team is smart about picking the right single to do that, I do think she's probably going to have a single featuring a popular rapper. The track list hasn't been revealed yet, but I think we'll see a track featuring a popular rapper. And if they service that to rhythmic and urban and it goes top 5, top 3 on both formats, she could have a decently big hit and sustain a little bit of momentum here. But again, there's the main points are that there's a lot more uncertainty for Nicki than there is for Ariana, both in terms of the first week for the album and in terms of post-album release success. And for Ariana, I think the main path lies in video streams and radio, pop radio. And for Nicki, it's through rhythmic and urban radio. With regards to Travis Scott, we kind of discussed earlier, whether we think that he'll have a lot of successful singles from this era, and it's hard to tell because the songs are generally not radio friendly. But maybe one of the songs that sticks on demand streaming can do well enough to have a little bit of a chart run, 10, 20 weeks in the Hot 100. You never know, right? I mean, Birds in the Trap, again, like we said before, Goosebumps took off way after the album came out, and it did end up getting substantial radio support. So things could the moral of the story here is that you can't take anything for granted, and I think that's true with both this upcoming album chart battle and with regards to post release singles. It's so interesting because before we would talk about awards show performances, like those were a big thing that would help boost you. I remember when, of course, I think we all remember when Ariana and Nicki were both on stage performing side to side on bicycles, and that gave the song a big boost. But now that's really something and I know Ariana's performing at the VMAs. I just don't know if that matters anymore.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we have not seen a huge boost from an award show in years. I mean, I want to take it back to the days where, the 2012 Grammys, for example, where Adele swept every category she was nominated for. And all of her songs, including Rolling in the Deep, got huge boosts. And that was just because of her power and because of how big she was back then in terms of her commercial performance. We have not seen anything. Obviously, that was an anomaly, but that was also a testament as to how award shows were, or how sales are very sensitive to award shows and promo. And 21 was a classic example of that. Even back in 2013 or even 2014, when the VMAs and the AMAs were being aired, American Music Awards, for example, the 2014 American Music Awards, where Taylor Swift was right in the middle of her 1989 era, and she opened the show with Blank Space, and I remember specifically Blank Space jumping, almost doubling its sales on iTunes just because of that one performance. We don't see any of that type of boost anymore because, we also have to put into the fact that, music sales are down, true, but also, people who actually watch physical live TV, those numbers are down as well. And that's kind of a discussion, that would be worth having, maybe factoring in, how people consume music. Is it through television or radio? And as we know, radio is one of the main sources of how people discover music these days. But yeah, award shows really don't give boosts or, significant boosts to songs anymore. And I remember in Billboard articles where they would actually mention, this song received a promotional boost due to the 2013 Video Music Awards or what have you. They don't even mention it anymore because it's not making any that much of a difference. I mean, you may see a spike here and there, but then literally the song will peak and then it'll go back to where it was. 2 or 3 years ago, you would see these songs if they were performed on award shows, they would, they would make their significant jumps, and they would stay there for days, stay at wherever they jumped to for days, and not even plummet in the 24 hours after it received this boost. It would stay there for maybe 3 or 4 days, and you don't see that type of stuff anymore. So something's going to have to be very phenomenal, very memorable for someone to have that type of boost. And then also you're gonna need the viewership to actually see that type of boost. But again, a lot of people are catching these award shows either on demand, days later, or just bits and pieces online that they see on YouTube. And I've noticed that the VMAs are now uploading all of their performances to YouTube now. So for the average person who doesn't want to sit at home and watch the VMAs, they can just go online to YouTube and watch every single performance that they want to watch. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Now, I want to ask you kind of a different question now, one that I think is interesting and especially pertinent to stands on ATRL. Ariana Grande has really been carrying the torch for pop music in 2018. The year has been completely dominated by rap and hip hop, as streaming has really risen, and Ariana's No Tears Left to Cry is arguably the biggest pure pop hit of the year. I mean, you can talk about The Middle, which is, I guess, more of a dance song. I think No Tears Left to Cry, people would argue, is the biggest pure pop hit of the year. So what do you think it says for the future of pop music if her era does badly? And what do you think it says about pop music if her era does well? And I guess similarly with Nicki, despite technically you can describe her as a rapper, but she's a more traditional artist. She's released pop hits in the past, and she has a pop girl like fan base. So what does it? I guess what does it say? Do you think for the future of pop music if these eras go badly and if they go well?
If they go, I think I would start with the badly side. I think if they go badly, I don't necessarily think that the whole state of pop music is completely done. I mean, we have seen instances in the past year where we've had pop hits such as "New Rules" by Dua Lipa, which peaked at number 6 earlier this year. We've seen these artists, these pop artists who collaborate with DJs or with, yeah, exactly, who collaborate with DJs to get hits as well. Even last year, "Scars You're Beautiful" was a hit, peaked at number 8, although most of its popularity was due to radio. Um, but I don't think that the era of pop girls will necessarily be over. I just think that right now it's kind of a valley in terms of if you're looking at a graph. I don't think obviously the pop girl moment is kind of past its peak right now, and it's kind of in the hill and kind of trending back upward. But in terms of the pop girl era coming back or making some type of resurgence, you know, I think I had a discussion with a friend, and I do truly believe that that music taste comes in cycles. You're gonna have a genre that's popular for a few years, maybe 5 years or so, and then that's gonna phase out, and then another genre is gonna take over, and that's gonna phase out. And I just think that it's kind of a cycle. And right now, when you think about the pop girls who are active today, you have your Ariana, you have your Selena Gomez, who's currently in the singles era right now with "Back to You," and you also have, or you had, BB. You have BB Rexa, who's a new pop girl, if you will, just had a huge hit with "Meant to Be." Although that was, a lot of it, you can owe some of its success to Florida Georgia Line, who really helped to get that country airplay to make it a massive crossover radio hit that it was. But now she also has a song called "I'm a Mess," which is taking off and is actually on its way to outpeaking her one of her solo singles, which was "I Got You," that peaked at number 43. And "I'm a Mess" is currently, I want to say, 53 right now. So it's making really, really good gains early on. So it remains to see if she's gonna be one of the, I guess, quote unquote main pop girls in the next couple years or so. So I think that structure of the pop girl era is starting to come back, but obviously with a different generation. You're not gonna have your Katy Perry's, your Gaga's, your Beyonce's, your Rihanna's. They're not gonna be as dominant as they were 5 or 6 years ago. You're gonna have a new set of, I guess, pop girls, if you will. They're gonna be either dominant or have some sort of strong presence in the next few years. And that's kind of my prediction. Not necessarily saying it's going to be, Ariana Grande, Bibi Rexha, all of them at once, but I think it's going to definitely be a new generation of pop girls. And I think on the flip side to that, if Ariana and Nicki's eras, do well or do well enough that they're noticeable, I think that's just going to open the doors for more opportunities for, you know, obviously in terms of radio airplay, in terms of, streaming numbers, which will probably end up trending more in favor of pop hits, if you will. But, that's going to take some time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. And I think things like that's going to take some time. I think when we mention time, I think it's safe to say that's going to be in the next maybe 2 years, 3 years, whatever. But we do know that the landscape of music changes so rapidly, in terms of sales being on the decline and streaming being on the rise. That's obviously something that we've witnessed with our own eyes in the last, 4 or 5 years, how much of those two have changed, for the better and for the worse, if you will. So, I do think that, in terms of even if they do badly or good, I do think that there's an era of new artists and new female artists that are going to take the place of what we used to have, 5 or 6 years ago, with the likes, again, like I said earlier, of, the Katy Perry's, the Gagas, who completely dominated the charts back then. There's always going to be some type of cycle to replace whatever needs to be replaced in terms of taste and what's not being felt, and if people want to gravitate from genre A to genre B.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is accurate, and I think it's true that trends can crop up at any time in the music industry and they can disappear just as quickly. But I think that you could argue that rap has not actually become more popular over the last 2 or 3 years. You could argue that it has, but I think you could also argue that it hasn't actually gotten significantly more popular over the last 2, 3 years. And what's happened is just that we've been able to measure its popularity more accurately with streaming, whereas we couldn't do that in the past. That's an interesting argument to make, and if you believe that, then you could justifiably see the rap dominance continuing for many more years to come, because there's a chance that rap could get even more popular in the future, and because it hasn't actually seen that increase yet, you could see a longer period of rap dominance. But I agree, hip hop, at least in its current form, is not going to be dominant permanently. Just, I mean, no genre ever will, as you said. But like like you said as well, I think that if these two eras are successful, then it's going to signal to labels that you need to. I mean, obviously, labels have been focusing on rap throughout the last few years, for rightfully so. But I think that it'll be a wake up call to labels to focus on their major pop artists and focus on developing future major pop artists as well. Because right now, I mean, the labels are just dealing with the major pop artists that they have, and they're not really breaking new ones. There hasn't, like you said, Camila and Dua are the two that are really trying to reach that level. They haven't gotten there yet, but those are the only two that are really being pushed to try to get to that level. And I think if Ariana's era especially is a big success, you'll see a lot more labels trying to groom a lot more artists to get to that level. Because if you think about the number of new rappers that have emerged in the time that Camila and Dua Lipa have been trying to break out, it's so much more. I mean, there are countless rappers that have popped up between during that time period, so that you'll see that balanced kind of you'll see that ratio kind of balance out a little bit in terms of breaking out pop artists versus breakout rap artists. I think you'll see more of the former if Ariana's era can be a big success. And as you mentioned, radio has really pop radio especially. I know it sounds strange to say. Pop radio has this year really displayed a steadfast commitment to pop music. And that's not insignificant because the trends have been so toward rap. Pop radio has not caved to the pressure of playing songs that are hugely popular just because they are rap. And I don't you can say that's a bad thing, you can say that's a good thing. It is a fact. And pop radio, at least for now, is retaining its audience. In fact, more and more people are listening to radio every year. The Nielsen Audio Today reports document this, and the one that came out last year showed that the radio audience is still growing by over 500,000 people each year, among all demographics, all races, all ages. So people are still listening to radio, and if radio stays the way it is, especially pop radio, there's always a glimmer of hope for pop artists that's out there. And so I think it's important to remember that because it can be easy to get caught up in big first week streams. It can be easy to caught up in videos that get a lot of hype, memes, challenges, stuff like that. Radio is still here, and as long as that's the true as long as that's the case, pop is still here. Whether it's in a more moribund form or whether it's the dominant genre, it's still here. So, an interesting note to end on for us. That about wraps it up for us. This has been an interesting podcast, and I'm sure next week we'll have even more to talk about as the race draws closer, and as we can glean more information about each of these high-profile releases. If you have any questions about these releases or about anything else with regards to charts in the music industry in general, make sure to post them in the thread. The thread is in the charts section on ATRL, and it'll be bumped as soon as this episode comes out later tonight, August 8th. And thanks so much for listening.
All right, thanks everybody.